connection, communication.
is to get away from our judgments and use more of the observation kind of role to talk about how you can ask the question in a way that's non-violent. You just strip off all your preconception and the communicating part will be more open. Hello everybody, welcome back to a new episode of Henri and Mike. Today is the 12th of August 2022. It is a Friday. At the moment it's about 8 minutes after 12 noon. Welcome to this part of Singapore. It's called Bukit Timah
Railway Station.
So recently they have redeveloped or reconstructed that again and it's open. It's where we are. It's on the western part of Singapore.
Bukit Timah Railway Station is part of this Malayan railway 100 years ago. They constructed this place in 1932 as a realignment of the entire railway linking from Penang in Malaysia down to Kuala Lumpur to Johor in Malaysia and then into Singapore. This place is historical because back in the olden days, a lot of resources, goods, food, and whatnot, they are actually transported from Malaysia down to Singapore using this, and it's connected all the way to where Tanjung Pagar is today, and that is where the port is currently still. So you can imagine a lot of resources were transported down to Singapore and then they export out from Singapore port itself. So in a sense, this place is one of the historical train station along the way, especially in Singapore. Singapore's government in fact redeveloped this place 2 years ago. I think started in 2020 and then it just reopened last month on 1st July. You can see at the back, this is the Bukit Timah Railway Station. It's developed in the very UK, continental Europe kind of cottage style. Right beside us is actually the staff quarters where the station masters and his family used to stay when this thing was still running. They redeveloped it into a cafe.
1932 cafe.
Yeah, 1932 because this station was built in 1932. So it's kind of like paying a tribute to the station and the history itself, you know?
So it used to be a very historic and important place because it connected both Malaysia to Singapore.
Yeah.
Like the old Malaya, they call it.
Yes.
When Singapore was still part of the Malaya Union, right?
Exactly. One interesting fact is, when the train comes in from the north down to the south, the passengers will alight on the right side. That means to the station. And on the left side, people who ride the horse, they will actually exit with the horse themselves because Old Turf City is just down the road. So quite a lot of horse racing enthusiasts, they will actually bring their horse down via train from Malaya.
Sounds pretty good because I remember like earlier this year, we had a hike.
Yes.
The Green Corridor. So we kind of walked down from
Tanjung Pagar all the way north to Bukit Timah, this area, and then we ended off somewhere around Hillville.
It was quite a beautiful hike because we were actually trekking on the old rail track.
Yes.
And they kind of just redeveloped into like a green space for people, for pedestrian or for runners or for hikers. So it was quite nice to be really immersed in the city and then you have all the greeneries around you. And then towards the end, we walk all the way to here. Back then, you can still see part of the railway track on the ground, but it was all fenced out because they were doing the reconstruction. So since 1st of July, they reopened. So that's why we thought, okay, we're going to have that filming today here. Today is a beautiful day. Blue sky, sunshine. Mike, how's the week going?
Consider a busy week this, even though it's short. National Day was on Tuesday, in fact, so actually a lot of people actually took 8th August, Monday off. So they actually have a long weekend. So took the chance to meet up with family and friends again, really catch up. Yeah, so I enjoyed myself. How about you?
I've been focusing a lot on my CrossFit. I mean, I can't really put it into a consistent. So every morning I wake up at 5 and I'll be there for the first session. So that's good. I mean, I start training with a group of people. I think I'm slowly getting into that whole group thing. And it's nice to get to know some new people here in Singapore. And on top of that, for me, it's like the morning session is I can focus more. So right after that, I'll go to a cafe like Starbucks in Chinatown and just really work on my stuff. It was pretty good. And other than that, just really attending to mom's needs at the moment. She had a operation this week again. That's where I am. Yeah. So do you have a word for this week?
No, not really.
Okay.
We can figure it out along the way.
Okay, let's figure it out then.
Come, let's go.
So the question to you is, Mike, do you think that you're a very good communicator? And what do you mean by a good communicator in that sense?
I think generally communication is important to me, like how you try to connect with somebody. How I see whether it's a good communicator, the first thing comes to mind is that whether you vibe with that person, you can get a message across as much as possible. And in terms of like what you mentioned, demand or request and the counterparty, kind of get where you're coming from. And also try to work things out, or agree or disagree and then work things out, I guess. Yeah, so there's some form of reciprocity in terms of the message getting across and then reciprocate from the counterparty. So I think that is essential, because sometimes when you do communicate, it becomes one way because the other person is not really listening. So I think that's where the message get missing.
In terms of enhancing the relationship with your loved ones, with your clients, with your colleagues, or in a more diplomatic international level, regardless of what scenario or circumstances you will be or you are in, how do you establish that connection with people?
I think first and foremost is when you are trying to establish a relationship with somebody, of course it must be genuine, like in going in and then try to let the counterparty know exactly what you are in here for as much as possible. Like for friends or acquaintance to become friends, it can just be like casual. Like, you know, if you go for professional networking, usually you will say like, oh, I'm so and so, I'm here for a particular event representing a certain organization, and then you let them know what's your capacity that you're entering this relationship. That's usually for professional setting. For friends, I guess, is we have a common friend, for instance, and then that's how we get into things. Family, I think for that, is just, we are family. We kind of know that whether we are close or distant relative and all that. So I think that's how usually you try to approach. Then thereafter is trying to find out what each other wants out of this entire connection or relationship, you want to call it. So on the international front, the diplomatic way, naturally, if let's say today I'm a minister of foreign affairs, then I'll be looking into maybe energy, for instance, or trade, for example. I'll talk about that, and I'll bring my counterparty from my country to talk to you about it. So that is very direct. But for friends, it depends on the relationship, how close you are. And then when you go there, like what we are talking about today, maybe just catching up in life and all this kind of thing. So the objective is set up right at the start. So that is setting the ground, and then you start to ding dong with each other about the content. And then it might not be connected or aligned in many things during the first session. It might be multiple sessions down the road. Thereafter, you reach the common objective of what both parties are trying to establish. I think if you want me to sum up, that will probably be kind of like a process, like how it will be kind of done.
From my understanding of what you just mentioned, in order to have a better connection with people, you basically summarize in 3 points. First, the interest. What is the interest of your counterparty? What he or she is trying to establish there?
Exactly.
And that can be done, second point, to verbal and non-verbal manner. Non-verbal is basically just looking at the person's body gesture, or you can feel the energy around it, the vibe, and based on your own experience, what you can tell from this person, what he or she really wants from you. And the third part, I think that's really important, is the verbal. And verbal part links to communication. Communication itself, it can definitely apply to different level, different stakeholder. For instance, your family, your loved one, your friends, and then to even higher level, like your community, or even to the international level. But of course, there'll be a different approach to that, how you communicate with the counterparty in order to establish that connection over there. So let's stay on the topic. In our 30s, we have encountered quite a lot of that. So the way you communicate will actually plays a role in how you connect with the person. Ever since I got back, I think we have been doing this Henri and Mike for the longest time ever. And which we also learned throughout the whole process as well, how we can really communicate with each other. And we do realize that there are certain differences and similarity between us, even though we grew up in the same household, but because our young adulthood we spent in different territory and different environment, that also structure who we are today in terms of how we communicate. It can be a bit indirect, it can be very direct to the point. So not every people can use the same method in communicating with you. When that's a scenario, how do you cut across and make sure that the person that you're communicating with understand where you're coming from, understand your needs, and so have the request?
I think a lot of time is more about clarification as much as possible, because you can imagine when two parties come together, be whether you're friends, professional level, or even family, right? You will slowly establish a basic understanding of that person, but this basic understanding might not be 100% of what that particular person wants to be. The only way you can do, in my opinion, is to do it multiple times to really get a broader idea and from different angles about this particular person's personality, characters, way of communicating, be whether verbal or non-verbal, so you can establish a better connection. So keyword here is the frequency and multiple times to establish a better picture.
You also forgot one very important virtue, the patience part.
That comes with that, for sure.
You need to be very patient to actually carry out that multiple, increase that frequency of talking to the counterparty.
Yes. So for that patience, if I want to address it, I think when it comes to family, maybe there will be slightly more patience involved in it. Friends to smaller extent. And then I think for professional level, there will definitely be a timeline. Because in the working world, there will always be a time frame for certain things to be done. If you get past that, then the window of establishing a closer connection will decrease tremendously after you pass the time frame.
It also depends on how strong your interests are. If it's at the business level, like your interest must be really strong that you want to achieve the target. So during this specific time period, you want to achieve that. But in terms of family-wise, it really depends on the strength of that.
Cohesiveness, unity, I think these are the two.
Cohesiveness. How willing are you to put in that time and effort to really mend that relationship? There's some family whereby they are not willing to open that up and they're guessing that the other person should know what he or she is thinking. And that often ended up differently. For instance, divorce or going separate ways. So in order to have a good relationship, to establish a connection within that relationship, you need to have a very effective communication skill. And that really requires you to understand your counterparty. This book I've been reading recently, I think that's also a very true reflection of how we communicate from the beginning of our time to right now. This guy called Marshall Rosenberg is an American psychologist. He has written a book in 1999 called Nonviolent Communication. And throughout the years, it has been rewritten for many times. So I think republished. Okay. And the latest one is in 2017. What he's trying to say in the book itself, it revolves around these 4 components. And these 4 components is the essence of non-violent communication. How it works is that usually when people talk to each other, you have your certain upbringing and your education system itself that result in the way you communicate with each other. So you already bring certain subjectivity and certain pre-assumption there. So when you bring all those into the conversation itself, you naturally bring in your own expectation. And certain things, when it's not going your way, you create certain fear, you create certain anxiety, you create a certain shame. So that results the receiving end to be reacting in a victimized situation as well. Like, why do you say things like that? It is not the truth. So a lot of time there's a miscommunication over there. So in situation like this, what Marshall Rosenberg is trying to say is you need to use these 4 components. 1 is the observation. Number 2 is the feelings. Number 3 is the needs. And number 4 is the request. So basically, when you are talking to someone, you have certain judgment. That's what we talk about. That can largely influence how the other person is answering your question, because the other person that's answering your questions is communicating with you, definitely have different upbringing and different environment. See, so you often come into clashes. I think that also happened between Mike and I.
Yes,
so
I agree.
Which means that the first point when you're talking about observation is a solution to your judgment. Like you listened carefully what the person is trying to say, where he or she is coming from. And then once you observe that, then you go into the feeling part. Why is this person feeling sad, feeling so aggressive? What's the story behind? So that links to the emotion we're talking about. We talked about in our previous episode in the T chapter, what's the difference between emotions and feelings.
Yes, right.
Emotions usually in the past, that resulted from within. That circumstances cause the emotion, and that emotion trigger a feeling. The feeling is the reaction part. So coming back to Marshall Rosenberg's 4 components, you have the feeling. So you understand, you observe what the person is talking about, you sense his or her emotion and the feelings there, and the feelings it leads to the reaction part. So you need to understand what is this person's needs in this case, and how can you request a better connected communication. Let's give a very classic example that he has given. For instance, a teacher and a student. A student's always been coming to the class late, like 20 minutes late to the class, and the class already started. And of course, the teacher get very pissed off, say, okay, the class started at this hour, but you're 20 minutes late. He'll be thinking inside of himself, why is it this and why is it that? And then naturally, the teacher in this case study will somehow punish the student by, saying, you need to carry out this disciplinary action. Like you need to pay for your lateness. You need to go for the half an hour detention center, whereby you reflect upon your poor behavior of being late, and then do your homework there, things like this. So the teacher will project and say those things to the student, as a form of punishment. Or the teacher could also possibly asking lots more questions during the class to, in a way, give a revenge to the student, say, this is the result when you are late. This scenario actually created a very violent form of communication style. The teacher did not really open up and observe and feel, and also to see what's the needs of the student. In the whole of communication, it's more about like bring out the empathy and compassion. You want to try to achieve that you're giving a very open communication, so you can bring out the how. Like, how can people answer that question to you? You give them more room to explore that arena instead of pinpointing based on your assumption?
You know, when we were younger, back in Taipei, we used to go to abacus class. I think you started first because you're a little bit older. And then when I got, I think maybe around 6 or 7, 6 maybe, and then I started, after your footstep. There was only one abacus at home. So naturally, mom has always been telling us that Henry will use first because he's going for class first. Then after my class, then you pass on to me. But there was a day that you were sick. You did not pass me the abacus. It was left at home because you're going around basically resting. So I still went ahead to the class. And then the teacher basically scolded me saying that, how can you come to class, an abacus class, without the abacus? How are you going to calculate? So she punished me by sitting there to use mental calculation to do it. And then it was only later, towards the end of the session, mom came, knocked on the door and passed the abacus to the teacher to ask her to pass to me. And that's where I got it. But at the end, the teacher did not apologize to me. She didn't observe. She just jumped straight into the conclusion that you must be forgetful, that's why you didn't bring. But she did not understand fully what was the arrangement, what happened. So up until today, there was no conversation between me and her about that abacus situation that day. But I believe when mom passed the abacus to her, she probably would realize that, oh, there must be some form of arrangement, because back then there was no handphone, you can't WhatsApp, you can't Telegram, you can't SMS, you can only call. So that probably was a misjudgment.
So coming back to the Marshall Rosenberg situation, if that's what we apply to the situation you just mentioned, if she could understand your needs at that point of time, which means that she already passed through the whole observation, she could probably think that, hey, Mike did not bring his abacus today. It's probably because maybe he could really forget about it, like really forgetful, but maybe there's some other reason behind. The idea of that reason is already the compassion empathy part, because you switch your role with the students to think, why could that be the reason he or she forgot about it? You observe that, and then you feel the feelings, you have the reaction parts, and then you try to think about what's the needs. For the teacher's perspective, it could be that I don't feel respected as a teacher. That's probably her thing, you see, because as a teacher, she wants to feel respected. And for that, she could either communicate with you or she could communicate with the parents. Both way, I think it's workable. But how can we find a solution? When you're finding the solution itself, it becomes the request. How can we do better next time? Which means that I think Marshall Rosenberg here, he wants to focus on how you can connect between the feelings and the needs. These two parts, the second and third component. In this case, let's try to practice that, like apply to the situation. I sense that Mike coming to class without his abacus, how I feel about it as a teacher. One 老师, and she said, oh, I don't feel respected. So she realized that that's her needs. So how she can talk to you back then could be that, Mike, it could be that you really forgot your abacus today, but I would like to understand, why did you forget about it? Or is it because some other reasons? Would you like to tell me? Because it does not really make sense, or it's not helpful when you come to class without your abacus. So I think when she comes from that approach, it'll make you better understand where she's coming from. You will open yourself up to answer that question. You can tell your story, right?
I agree. I think under an idealistic situation, that will be great. But I feel like there were a few things during that particular situation back then. Was first, I think in the Asian culture, there's always this respect that you will give to the teacher, elders. So you don't really dare to speak up. If let's say she has asked me back then, as my younger self, there will be a lot of fear. But right now as an adult, putting on the Asian lens, trying to address things, I think you'll still pay attention to the elders, giving their respect. But I think we have also learned to open up more and tell them why, trying to establish the reasoning. I just want to highlight that portion, the maturity that comes in it, as well as the Asian values. I think in a Western society, maybe the way the parenting is bring you up when it comes to communications is let's have an open communication. Let's talk. Immediately elevate you to almost the same level when you're talking, even though it's a parent and child relationship. But that's quite different in the Asian society, you see.
While we're unpacking this topic, there's a lot of thoughts coming across my mind, like how you educate and do the parenting itself. It plays a huge role in a person's life. For instance, use the word fear. Confucianism basically say that the teacher is the boss, basically. So whatever he or she says, you just have to shut up and respect it and listen to it. It gives an order in a society, but then it does not really help to establish that critical thinking on yourself. First point. This is just my view. And second point, it installs some fear in you. When you have that fear, it prevents you from moving forward, like to explore certain things, or prevent you from asking questions, because all the time you're thinking that you might offend the teacher. But that does not help in learning, because learning itself is a two direction. The teacher says something, but the teacher also receives something from the student as a feedback to see how or she can improve on her teaching or his teaching. And the same thing for student as well. So it helps them to learn better. That's totally another topic, but I can see the differences in the Western and Eastern education. Because when I was studying Australia and also in Germany and Liechtenstein, a lot of times I wasn't very used to that students are so active in asking questions or having a debate with the teacher or with the professor. So I'll often be quiet or wait till the end of the class or end of lecture, and I'll approach the professor to ask questions. But this is not the way. When you have ideas, just say it out and discuss, because that's always a two ways of learning. So coming back to that part, I think that's the essence of Marshall Rosenberg's like 4 components is really essential, because what he's trying to install in us is to get away from our judgments and use more of the observation kind of role to talk about how you can ask the question in a way that's non-violent. You just strip off all your preconception, and the communicating part will be more open. So you gain more trust with your stakeholders, with your counterparty that you're talking with. So that book itself, I'll definitely recommend people to read it.
Sorry, what is it called? Come again?
It's called Nonviolent Communication. Yeah, that's where I am for this week in terms of like communicating part. And I think when we practice that, not that it takes a lot more time, but when you put yourself in that situation, you will open up more chances and opportunity for people to come forward, be it in a family level, be it in a friends level, be it in your colleagues, clients, or even within the whole international community. I think that's part of the diplomatic way of talking and communicating as well. I think that's a good episode. Let's come to a conclusion there. Do you have a word for it already?
Connection, communication.
Definitely connection and communication. I think that really draws the essence of our chat today. Okie dokie. Thank you very much for joining us to Bukit Timah Railway Station here. If next time you're in Singapore, you can definitely come here and check it out. It's a very beautiful place. All the greens around. You have the little cafe here. You can go in and check it out, have a cup of coffee and eat some local delicacies. With that, be kind to yourself. Don't forget to smile.
Keep each other company.
Subscribe to Henri Mike, comments and like. We shall see you in the very next episode.
This is Mike
And Henry.
signing off.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
So stay tuned and remember to subscribe, comment, and like. Turn on the notification bell. Bye.
Bye.